The neon sign flickered like a dying heartbeat above the Desert Rose diner, casting erratic shadows across the cracked asphalt parking lot. It was just past midnight in the forgotten stretch of highway between nowhere and regret, where the air hung heavy with the scent of sizzling grease and exhaust fumes from long-haul trucks. Inside, the jukebox hummed a forgotten country ballad, its notes weaving through the haze of cigarette smoke that clung to the vinyl booths like ghosts. Olivia wiped down the counter for the third time that night, her hands trembling slightly as she stared at her reflection in the polished steel. Eyes hollow, lips pressed into a thin line. She'd been here for 8 years, serving coffee to drifters and dreams deferred. But tonight, the weight of it all pressed down harder than usual. A group of roughneck truckers at the corner booth laughed too loudly, their voices booming like thunder in the empty space. One of them, a burly man with a stained flannel shirt, called her over again, his leer cutting through the dim light. "Hey, sweetheart, another round and maybe something sweeter this time." Olivia forced a smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes, and poured their beers with mechanical precision. As she set the glasses down, the man's hand brushed hers, deliberate, lingering. She pulled back, heart pounding, but the laughter only grew. "Come on, darling, ain't no one here to save you from a little fun." The words hung in the air, thick with implication, stirring a fear she'd buried deep. No one had ever really seen her, not in this god-forsaken place. No one had ever stayed. She retreated to the counter, busying herself with a rag, but the tears welled up unbidden. In a quiet moment between orders, as the jukebox skipped to a slower tune, she murmured to no one in particular, or maybe to the empty stool in front of her, "No one has ever kissed me. Not like they meant it. Not like I mattered." The words escaped like a confession, raw and unintended, swallowed by the hum of the diner, but they lingered, echoing in her chest, a silent scream against the loneliness that had defined her life. Abandoned as a teen, scraping by on tips and false hopes, Olivia had built walls higher than the desert mesas outside. Yet tonight they cracked. The rumble started low, a distant growl that built into a roar, vibrating the windows and silencing the truckers mid-laugh. Headlights pierced the darkness like searchlights, sweeping across the lot as a lone motorcycle pulled up to the curb. The engine cut off with a final sputter, leaving only the tick of cooling metal and the whisper of wind through the sagebrush. Ethan dismounted, his leather jacket creaking as he swung his leg over the Harley, boots hitting the ground with a solid thud. He was a man carved from the road itself, mid-40s, with salt and pepper stubble shadowing a jaw set like granite, and eyes that held the weariness of too many sunrises over empty horizons. Scars traced his knuckles, faint reminders of battles fought in shadows, and a faded tattoo of a broken chain peeked from his sleeve, symbolizing a promise he'd made long ago, one that still chained him to the ghosts of his past. Ethan paused at the door, scanning the lot with the instinct of someone who'd learned to trust his gut over maps. He'd been riding aimless for hours, fleeing the ache of a letter he'd received that morning, a faded envelope from an old war buddy, reminding him of vows sworn in foxholes under starless skies. "We look out for our own," the note had read, stirring memories of loss. A brother in arms gone too soon, a family shattered by secrets Ethan carried like extra weight in his saddlebags. He wasn't here for redemption tonight, or so he told himself, just a cup of black coffee to chase the dust from his throat. But as he pushed through the door, the bell jingling like a warning, his gaze locked on Olivia. She stood frozen behind the counter, the trucker's jeers fading into the background, as if the world had narrowed to this moment. He strode to the counter, his presence filling the space like a storm cloud rolling in. Tall, unyielding, with the faint scent of leather and rain-kissed asphalt trailing him. The truckers eyed him warily, their bravado shrinking under his steady stare. Ethan slid onto a stool, two down from the empty one, and nodded at Olivia. "Coffee. Black." His voice was gravel rough, laced with the drawl of southern roads, but there was a gentleness in it, hidden like a blade in a boot. She poured it without a word, steam rising in lazy curls, but her hands shook again. He noticed the subtle tremor, the way her eyes darted to the floor. "Rough night?" he asked, not prying, just offering the quiet anchor of someone who'd known his share of storms. Olivia glanced up, surprised by the lack of judgment in his tone. "Every night's rough here," she whispered, then bit her lip, regretting the vulnerability, but something in his steady gaze pulled the words out. "It's just, I said something stupid earlier. About no one ever." She trailed off, cheeks flushing under the fluorescent lights. The truckers shifted, one muttering under his breath, but Ethan's focus never wavered. He took a slow sip of coffee, the bitter heat grounding him, and set the mug down with deliberate care. In that pause, the diner seemed to hold its breath, the sizzle of the grill fading, the jukebox's melody softening to a hush. Without another word, Ethan stood, his boots echoing on the linoleum as he closed the distance between them. The counter was a barrier, but he leaned over it, close enough for her to catch the warmth of his breath, the faint trace of mint from gum chewed to kill the road's bitterness. The truckers fell silent, tension crackling like static. Olivia's eyes widened, heart thundering, as he reached out, not to grab, but to gently tilt her chin up with calloused fingers. Time stretched, the world blurring to the edges. The gleam of his ring, worn from years of solitary rides, the soft glow of the neon reflecting in her startled gaze. Then, with a tenderness that belied his rugged frame, he leaned in and kissed her, soft, lingering, a promise sealed in the quiet of the night. Not demanding, not fleeting, but real, like she mattered. He pulled back slowly, his eyes holding hers for a beat longer, conveying what words couldn't. That promises, once broken, could be mended on the open road. The truckers grumbled but stayed seated, cowed by the unspoken authority in his stance. Olivia touched her lips, stunned, a spark igniting in the ashes of her isolation. Ethan straightened, tossing a few bills on the counter, more than enough for the coffee. "You deserve better than this dust bowl," he said quietly, voice low so only she could hear. "If you ever need a ride out, you find me. Ironclad word." It was the echo of his old vow, the one from the letter, now extended to her, a stranger who'd become something more in an instant. As he turned to leave, the bell jingling again, Olivia watched him mount his bike, the engine roaring back to life like a beast awakened. Headlights cut through the dark, illuminating the endless highway ahead. She didn't know his name yet, or the shadows he carried from a life of lost battles and unspoken regrets. But in that kiss, something shifted. A thread of connection weaving through the loneliness, hinting at a journey that would bind fates in ways neither could foresee. The diner door swung shut behind him, but the warmth lingered, a quiet revolution in the dead of night. The desert wind whipped across the empty highway, carrying the faint echo of the Harley's growl as Ethan accelerated into the night. The road stretched like a black ribbon under the moon's pale gaze, flanked by saguaros, standing sentinel in the silvery light. His mind replayed the diner's glow, Olivia's wide eyes, reflecting a mix of shock and something softer, hope, maybe, flickering like the neon sign he'd left behind. He'd meant the kiss as a spark, a reminder that the world held more than leers and loneliness. But as the miles blurred, the weight of his own words settled in. Ironclad word. It was the same vow he'd whispered in a rain-soaked trench years ago, to a brother who'd pulled him from the brink of a roadside ambush. Marcus had died clutching that promise, his last breath a plea to look after the scattered souls they'd sworn to protect. Ethan had run from it then, burying the grief under layers of asphalt and solitude. Now it clawed back, demanding payment. Back at the Desert Rose, the air inside thickened with the truckers' renewed mutters. Their earlier silence shattered like cheap glass. Olivia stood rooted behind the counter, fingers still brushing her lips where Ethan's touch had lingered. A warmth that cut through the chill of the diner's drafty vents. The jukebox clicked to a new track, a mournful guitar riff underscoring the tension. She'd seen men like him before, drifters with eyes full of stories, promising escape before vanishing with the dawn. But this felt different, like a key turning in a lock she'd long forgotten. The burly trucker from the booth slammed his glass down, foam sloshing over the rim. Who the hell does that biker think he is? Strutting in here like he owns the place. His companions nodded, emboldened by the empty lot outside, their laughter turning sharp, edged with resentment. Olivia's pulse quickened as she cleared their table, avoiding their stares. "Just leave it," she murmured, stacking plates with clattering urgency. But the leader grabbed her wrist, not hard enough to bruise, but firm, a reminder of boundaries crossed too often. "You gonna let some grease monkey kiss you and act like you're too good for us now?" The words stung, dredging up memories of her own fractured past, a mother who'd vanished into the night, leaving her to fend off shadows in foster homes that smelled of stale regret. She'd built this life on survival, not dreams, but tonight's spark ignited a quiet rebellion. She yanked her arm free, voice steady despite the tremor. "Let go, I'm done serving your kind of trouble." The diner door burst open before the trucker could retort, the bell's jingle swallowed by the sudden intrusion. It wasn't Ethan returning, but a shadow from the parking lot, a lanky figure in a hooded jacket, eyes darting like a coyote scenting weakness. He wasn't one of the truckers, but his presence reeked of opportunism, the kind that preyed on roadside isolation. "Heard there's a party in here," he drawled, sliding into a booth with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Olivia's stomach twisted. She'd seen his type slip in after closing, pocketing tips, or worse. The truckers exchanged glances, their bravado inflating as they welcomed the newcomer with slaps on the back. The air grew heavier, laced with the sour tang of spilled beer and unspoken threats. Outside, Ethan's bike had carried him only a few miles before instinct pulled him over. He killed the engine on a gravel shoulder, the sudden quiet amplifying the distant howl of a coyote. The letter from Marcus's widow burned in his pocket, a plea not just for remembrance but action. "The boys from the unit are scattering," she'd written, "some tangled in debts they can't shake, others facing shadows from the old days. You were his anchor, Ethan, be ours." It stirred the ghosts, the explosion that had claimed Marcus, the shrapnel scars Ethan still felt in humid nights, the unspoken code of their platoon. Iron promise, they'd called it, a pact to stand unyielding for the fallen. He'd broken it once, walking away after the funeral, convinced his presence only brought more ruin. But Olivia's confession echoed Marcus's last words. "Don't let the road take us all." Headlights from an oncoming semi blinded him momentarily, and Ethan squinted into the rearview mirror. The diner's faint glow lingered on the horizon, a beacon pulling at threads he'd tried to sever. He revved the engine once, testing the resolve, then wheeled around, tires kicking up dust that swirled like unanswered questions. The ride back felt shorter, charged with purpose, the wind tearing at his jacket as if urging him forward. By the time he crested the rise overlooking the lot, the scene inside had escalated, the hooded man's hand on Olivia's arm as she tried to usher him out, the truckers rising like a pack, sensing vulnerability. Ethan dismounted silently, boots crunching on gravel as he approached the window. Through the smudged glass, he watched her chin lift in defiance, the same spark he'd ignited now fueling her stand. No violence, he reminded himself. That path led only to more chains, but inaction, that was the true betrayal of the promise. He pushed through the door, the bell's chime cutting the rising voices like a judge's gavel. The room froze, all eyes turning to the silhouette filling the frame, broad shoulders, unhurried stride, the glint of determination in his gaze. "You forgot your change," Ethan said evenly, holding out a crumpled bill he'd palmed earlier, though his eyes locked on the hooded intruder. It was a ploy, a reason to re-enter without drawing irons, but the weight of it carried the full force of his intent. Olivia's relief washed over her features, subtle as a desert dawn. The truckers shifted uneasily, the leader's bluster deflating. "This ain't your business, Ryder," the hooded man snarled, releasing her arm but stepping forward, fists clenched. Ethan's voice dropped low, steady as the highway's hum. "It is now. Walk away, or the road gets longer for all of you." The words weren't a threat, but a boundary drawn in the sand of honor, the iron promise extending like roots through cracked earth. Tension coiled, the jukebox's tune fading to static as the men weighed their choices. Olivia watched, breath held, the air electric with the possibility of redemption, not just for her, but for the man who'd stopped his bike and walked straight into her world. In that suspended moment, Ethan felt the ghosts align. Marcus's nod of approval, the unit's scattered souls calling from the shadows. This wasn't about a kiss anymore. It was about fulfilling the vow, one quiet stand at a time. The hooded man hesitated, then backed toward the door, the truckers following like scolded dogs. As they spilled into the night, engines coughing to life in the lot, Olivia met Ethan's gaze across the counter. "Why'd you come back?" she whispered, the question hanging like morning mist. "Because promises don't fade with the miles," he replied, the truth settling between them like a shared secret. The diner exhaled, the neon sign steadying its flicker, as the first threads of an unlikely alliance wove tighter under the watchful stars. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, casting a sterile glow on the scuffed linoleum as the last of the trucker's taillights faded into the highway's black maw. The hooded man's silhouette lingered in the doorway for a heartbeat longer, his eyes narrowing at Ethan like a predator weighing retreat before he spat a curse and vanished into the night. The door swung shut with a finality that echoed through the empty space, the bells jingled, dissolving into silence. Olivia leaned against the counter, her breath coming in shallow waves, the rag forgotten in her fist. The air still carried the stale bite of spilled beer and sweat, but now it mingled with the faint, grounding scent of Ethan's leather jacket, earthy, like rain on sun-baked clay. Ethan didn't move at first, his broad frame blocking the entrance like a sentinel carved from the desert itself. He scanned the room with those weathered eyes, ensuring no shadows stirred before turning back to her. The jukebox clicked off abruptly, leaving only the distant hum of crickets and the low sizzle of the cooling grill. "You all right?" he asked, voice rough as gravel, but laced with a concern that felt earned, not obligatory. He stepped closer, not crowding her, but close enough to let the warmth of his presence chase the chill from her skin. She nodded, though her hands trembled as she smoothed her apron, the fabric worn thin from countless shifts. "Yeah, thanks to you." The words hung between them, fragile as the steam rising from a fresh pot of coffee. Olivia glanced at the clock. 2:17 a.m., its red digits blurring slightly through unshed tears. In all her years here, no one had circled back, not for her. Drifters came and went like tumbleweeds, leaving only dust and empty cups. But this man, with his salt-streaked beard, and the faint scar tracing his temple like a forgotten riverbed, had returned. It stirred something deep, a whisper of the girl she'd been before the world had ground her down. Ethan slid back onto the stool, gesturing for her to sit if she wanted. She hesitated, then perched on the edge of the counter stool opposite him, the vinyl creaking under her weight. Outside, The wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending a fine spray of sand whispering against the glass. "Those types. They don't forget a slight," he said quietly, pouring himself another cup from the pot she'd left steaming. The liquid was dark as midnight oil, its aroma sharp and bitter, cutting through the lingering haze. "You got family nearby? Someone to watch your back?" Olivia's laugh was short, hollow, like wind through hollow bones. She shook her head, dark curls escaping her ponytail to frame a face etched with quiet endurance. "Family? That's a luxury I traded for tips a long time ago." Her voice softened, the confession slipping out unbidden, mirroring the one that had drawn him in earlier. Abandoned at 16 in a border town that smelled of diesel and despair, she'd bounced through homes that were more cages than cradles. A promise from a social worker, "We'll find you a place," had shattered like cheap china, leaving her to forge her own path in diners like this one. "My ma left when I was little, said she'd come back, but promises like that, they evaporate like morning dew out here." He nodded, understanding, etching deeper lines around his eyes. Ethan took a slow sip, the mug's heat seeping into his calloused palms, grounding him against the flood of memories her words unleashed. The letter in his pocket felt heavier now, its creases worn from too many readings under dashboard lights. Marcus's widow, Elena, had penned it with a hand steadied by grief's unyielding grip. He always said, "You were the one who kept us whole, Ethan. The iron promise. We need it now more than ever." It wasn't just nostalgia. The unit's old shadows had resurfaced. Debts from wartime deals gone sour, a corrupt sheriff in their hometown squeezing the widows and vets for protection money that lined his pockets. Ethan had ridden away to escape it, but the road had a way of circling back, like a noose tightening mile by mile. "I know about evaporating promises," he murmured, setting the mug down with a soft clink. His gaze drifted to the window, where the moon hung low, silvering the saguaros into ghostly guardians. "Made one in a place where the air tasted of cordite and fear. Swore to a brother I'd look out for his kin if he didn't make it. He didn't, and I let the miles bury it." The admission was quiet, but it carried the weight of shrapnel, the kind that lodged deep and festered. Ethan had been the medic in their platoon, patching wounds under fire, but he'd failed Marcus in the end, too slow, too shattered by the blast that claimed him. The iron promise had been their creed, unyielding loyalty, a family forged in foxholes, not blood. Now, scattered across dusty towns, they faced new battles, foreclosures, addictions, the slow erosion of honor by a system that chewed up the broken and spat out the forgotten. Olivia watched him, the flicker of the neon sign painting blue highlights across his features. There was a kinship in his silence, a shared scar tissue from lives unraveled by betrayal. "Sounds like we're both carrying ghosts," she said, her voice gaining a thread of steel. "But you came back tonight. That's more than most." The trucker's intrusion had been a spark, but Ethan's return fanned it into something warmer, a tentative flame against the desert cold. She poured him a refill without asking, the pot's gurgle filling the pause, and for the first time in years, the diner felt less like a trap and more like a crossroads. As the clock ticked toward 3 a.m., a low rumble echoed from the highway. Not the aggressive growl of semis, but something steadier, multiplied. Ethan straightened, ears attuned to the cadence of engines. The way they harmonized like a pack on the prowl. Headlights pierced the gloom outside, a convoy of 5 bikes pulling into the lot, their chrome glinting under the moon. Riders dismounted, leather creaking, boots thudding on asphalt. Men and women with the same road-worn edges as Ethan. Tattoos of broken chains, inked like badges of survival. They weren't here by chance. One of them, a wiry woman with a braid like twisted rope, nodded through the window, her expression a mix of relief and urgency. Ethan rose slowly, the stool scraping back like a drawn breath. "My crew," he explained, though the word carried layers. Chosen family, the remnants of the iron promise clinging together against the pull of isolation. "Got word from an old friend. Trouble brewing back home. The kind that doesn't wait." He met Olivia's eyes, the connection from the kiss still humming between them, unspoken but electric. "You said no one's ever kissed you, like you mattered. I aim to change that pattern. But if you're tired of this place, of waiting for promises that don't show, ride with us, at least till dawn." Her heart stuttered, the offer hanging like a lifeline in the stale air. The riders gathered outside, their murmurs filtering through the glass, talk of a sheriff's raid on a vet's garage, a widow's home under threat. It mirrored her own fractures, the corruption that festered in forgotten corners, preying on the vulnerable. Olivia glanced at the empty booths, the grease-stained menus, the life she'd endured but never chosen. The wind howled again, carrying the promise of open road, of loyalty that didn't fade. Before she could answer, the diner's phone rang, a shrill intrusion slicing the night, its corded receiver vibrating on the wall. Ethan paused, hand on the door, as Olivia reached for it, her face paling at the voice on the other end. It was the hooded man, his tone laced with venom. "Tell your biker boyfriend, the road's got eyes, we're not done here." The line clicked dead, leaving the dial tones drone like a warning bell. Outside, the convoy's engines idled, ready to roar, but the shadows of the past pressed closer, demanding a stand, not just for one soul, but for all the promises teetering on the edge. The diner's phone receiver clattered back into its cradle, the plastic cool against Olivia's palm, as the dial tone faded into a hollow echo. Her fingers lingered on the cord, knuckles whitening, while the threat from the hooded man coiled in her chest like barbed wire, sharp, unseen, ready to snag. Outside, the convoy's engines rumbled in low harmony, their exhaust a faint haze under the moon's indifferent gaze, mingling with the desert's dry, mineral scent that seeped through the cracks in the door. Ethan stood frozen mid-step, his hand hovering near the knob, the wiry woman's face pressed to the glass outside, her braids swaying as she signaled urgency with a subtle tilt of her head. The air inside thickened, the fluorescent hum amplifying the pulse of unspoken dangers, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Olivia met Ethan's eyes, the spark from earlier now tempered by steel, a quiet resolve blooming in the ruins of her fear. "He said you're not done," she whispered, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The words bridged the space between them, pulling him back from the threshold. Ethan nodded once, the motion economical, like a soldier acknowledging fire. He didn't need details. The venom in the call was enough to stir the instincts honed in foxholes, where threats hid in the periphery like landmines. "Shadows like that don't ride alone," he said, low and measured, crossing back to the counter. His boots left faint imprints on the linoleum, each step a deliberate anchor in the shifting night. The crew outside shifted, their silhouettes merging with the saguaros, a chosen family waiting on his word, the iron promise incarnate, bound not by blood, but by vows etched in survival. She poured 2 more cups of coffee, the pot's gurgle a small rebellion against the tension, steam curling like question marks into the stale air. Ethan accepted his with a murmur of thanks, the mug's heat seeping through his gloves, grounding the rush of memories. Marcus's grin under helmet lights, the unit's laughter cutting through the roar of convoys in foreign dust. That promise had been simple then: watch each other's backs, pull the fallen from the fire. Now it stretched across states, mending fractures in lives like Olivia's, cracked by neglect and opportunists who preyed on the isolated. "Back home, it's the same rot," he continued, sipping the bitter brew, its edge sharpening his focus. "Sheriff's got his hooks in the old unit, extorting vets for protection, for closing on widows like Eleanor, Marcus's woman. She reached out because the promise is fraying, and I'm the thread holding what's left. Olivia leaned on the counter, the worn edge pressing into her elbows, her apron's pocket heavy with forgotten tips, scraps of a life pieced from pennies and patience. The confession from earlier echoed faintly, her own evaporating promises mirroring his, a mother's vanishing act, foster doors slamming on half-kept oaths, but Ethan's return had cracked her walls, letting in the possibility of something solid, unyielding. And this crew, they're part of it? She asked, glancing at the window where a burly rider with a faded ironclad patch on his vest lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating a face scarred by old flames, literal and figurative. Yeah, Ethan replied, his gaze drifting to them with a mix of pride and ache. Jenna there? The one with the braid. She patched me up after Marcus went down, lost her leg below the knee to the same blast, but she rides like the devil's chasing her. And Ray, the big one smoking? He was our scout, eyes like a hawk. We scattered after the service, chasing horizons to outrun the ghosts, but Elena's letter, it called us back. Debts piling up. Homes slipping away to a system that chews heroes and spits out statistics. The sheriff's no better than that hooded snake, corruption dressed in a badge, twisting justice into a noose. His voice carried the weight of moral thunder, not rage, but a quiet storm building toward reckoning. The neon sign outside buzzed erratically, casting erratic blues across his features, highlighting the broken chain tattoo that snaked up his forearm, a symbol of bonds reforged, not severed. The convoy's leader, Jenna, pushed through the door then, the bell's chime sharp as a starter pistol. Wind rushed in with her, carrying the chill bite of night and the faint tang of motor oil from her leathers. She was compact, fierce, her prosthetic hidden under boot and denim, but her limp was a badge, not a hindrance. "Ethan, we gotta move," she said, voice like rusted hinges, eyes flicking to Olivia with assessing warmth. Scouts spotted a tail, black SUV, unmarked, circling the ridge. Same plates as the ones shaking down Elena's garage last week. If it's the sheriff's boys, they're closing in. The words landed heavy, stirring the air like dust devils, and Olivia felt the diner's isolation sharpen into peril. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was a web of loyalties, promises pulling strangers into alliance against a tide of institutional greed. Ethan set his mug down, the clink decisive, and turned to Olivia. "You don't have to," he started, but she cut him off, chin lifting in the same defiance that had faced down the truckers. "I do. This place. It's been my cage. If your promise means standing for the overlooked, count me in. At least to the next town." Her words sealed it, a vow of her own, born from the kiss that had awakened her to mattering. Jenna nodded approval, a ghost of a smile cracking her weathered face. "Welcome to the ride, sister. We don't leave our own behind." As they stepped into the lot, the convoy's engines swelled to life, a symphony of growls vibrating through the gravel, headlights slicing the dark like blades. Olivia locked the diner door for what felt like the last time, the keys jangle a farewell to chains. Ethan offered her his spare helmet, its visor scratched from miles of mercy runs, and she mounted behind him, arms wrapping around his waist. Tentative at first, then firm, the leather of his jacket warm against her cheek. The wind tugged at her curls as they pulled out, the group forming a protective wedge against the highway's endless black. In the rear view, the desert rose shrank, its neon flicker, a dying ember, while ahead loomed the ridge where shadows waited. But as the miles unspooled, the black SUV emerged from the gloom, its high beams glaring like accusatory eyes. Jenna's bike surged ahead, signaling a split, half the crew veering off to draw pursuit, the rest pressing on toward Elena's town. Ethan's grip tightened on the throttle, the engine's roar drowning doubts, but the moral crossroads loomed. Confront the corruption head-on, or evade and regroup. Olivia felt it too, pressed against his back, the vibration syncing with her heartbeat, a chosen family accelerating into the fray, where promises would be tested in the fire of dawn's first light. The chase wove through canyons, dust plumes rising like signals of defiance, the air alive with the scent of sage and scorched rubber. Ethan's mind raced ahead to Elena's doorstep, the sheriff's smug face a spectre from letters describing raids and false charges. This wasn't vengeance, it was justice, poetic and unyielding, the iron promise demanding they expose the rot without becoming it. As bullets whined past, warning shots from the SUV, Ray's bike swerved to block. His shout lost in the wind, but his intent clear. Protect the core. Olivia clung tighter, whispering into Ethan's ear, "We end this for all the forgotten promises." Her words fueled him, a redemption shared, binding their paths in the night's unmerciful grip. By the time they crested the final rise, the first hints of grey streaked the horizon, the convoy intact but breathless. Elena's modest ranch house came into view, lights flickering like a beacon. But so did the sheriff's cruiser parked crooked in the drive, lights off, but menace radiating. Ethan killed his engine at the edge of the property, the group dismounting in silent coordination, boots silent on dew-kissed grass. Jenna handed out flashlights, their beams narrow swords against the encroaching dawn. "Truth first," Ethan murmured, echoing the unit's creed. "No blood if we can help it." Olivia nodded, her presence a quiet strength as they advanced. Family chosen, promises alive, ready to shatter the chains of corruption, one honorable stand at a time. If this tale of unbreakable bonds has stirred something in you, drop a like below. It helps these stories of quiet courage reach more lost souls on the road. The first blush of dawn crept over the horizon, like a hesitant promise, painting the ranch house in strokes of pale gold and lingering shadow. Dew clung to the wild grasses flanking the dirt drive, releasing a crisp, earthy scent that mingled with the fading bite of exhaust from the convoy's idled bikes. Elena's home stood weathered but defiant, a single-story adobe with a sagging porch, its windows glowing faintly against the pre-dawn chill, like embers refusing to die. The sheriff's cruiser loomed in the drive, its bulk a dark sentinel, chrome accents catching the light in mocking gleams. No sirens wailed, no lights flashed. This was the quiet menace of authority gone sour, the kind that knocked softly before kicking indoors. Ethan signaled the crew with a raised fist, his silhouette etched against the paling sky, boots sinking slightly into the soft soil as they fanned out. Jenna took the left flank, her braids swinging like a pendulum as she moved with purposeful grace, prosthetic leg whispering over the ground. Ray covered the right, his massive frame low and steady, the ironclad patch on his vest a badge glinting in the half-light. Olivia stayed close to Ethan, her breath shallow but even, the helmet strap still chafing her neck, a reminder of the miles they'd burned to reach this moment. Her hands, unaccustomed to the night's urgency, clenched at her sides, nails digging into palms slick with nervous sweat. The air hummed with tension, thick as the morning mist rolling in from the distant mesas, carrying whispers of sage and the faint, acrid tang of gun oil from unseen holsters. They approached the porch in silence, the gravel crunching underfoot like brittle bones, each step a measured beat in the rhythm of resolve. Ethan's heart thudded steadily, echoing the pulse of old oaths, the iron promise forged in the chaos of desert skirmishes where loyalty was the only currency that didn't devalue. Marcus's face flickered in his mind, that crooked smile amid the dust and din, his final gasp binding them all. "Keep the fire lit, brother, for the ones who can't." Eleanor had kept it flickering, raising 2 kids on a widow's pension while fending off the sheriff's fees, extortion dressed as fines, preying on vets too scarred to fight back. The letter had been her flair, raids on the garage where Marcus's tools still gathered dust. Threats to seize the land that held his grave marker in the backyard scrub. A floorboard creaked inside, sharp as a warning shot, and the front door swung open before they reached the steps. Elena emerged, her frame slight but unbowed, greying hair pulled into a practical bun, eyes sharp as flint under the porch light. She clutched a shotgun loosely at her side, not raised, but present. A mother's line in the sand. "Ethan," she breathed, relief cracking her voice like dry earth under rain. "You came." Behind her, the sheriff's shadow stirred in the hallway, his silhouette broad and officious, badge catching the light like a false halo. He stepped forward, hand resting on his belt near the holster, face a mask of practiced authority, jowls tight, eyes cold as the cruiser's grill. "Ma'am, this is official business," the sheriff drawled, his voice oily smooth, laced with the drawl of small-town power. He eyed the group with dismissive scorn, lingering on Olivia's unfamiliar face before settling on Ethan. "Debts don't pay themselves. That garage, it's collateral now. Sign the papers or we start towing at sunup." The words hung heavy, stirring the air with the scent of his cheap cologne, cloying, overpowering the dawn's freshness. Elena's jaw set, but her hands trembled on the gun's stock, the weight of years pressing down, lost harvests from inspections, medical bills twisted into liens, all funneled to line pockets in the county seat. Ethan stepped onto the porch, boards groaning under his weight, positioning himself between Elena and the lawman without a word of aggression. The crew held their ground, a silent wall of leather and resolve, the faint jingle of keys on Jenna's belt, the only sound breaking the standoff. "We've got the papers you need," Ethan said evenly, pulling a worn folder from his jacket, affidavits from the unit's scattered members, bank drafts pooled from road-worn savings, testimonies from witnesses to the sheriff's shakedowns. It wasn't cash, it was proof, meticulously gathered over frantic calls during the ride, exposing the web of false claims and backroom deals. Iron promise stands. No more taking from those who've already given enough. The sheriff's laugh was a bark, short and hollow, echoing off the adobe walls. He snatched the folder, flipping through it with feigned boredom, but his eyes narrowed at the details, names of deputies implicated, dates of raids that smelled of setup. This some kind of joke? Vigilantes playing lawyer? His hand twitched toward his radio, but Ray's low rumble from the yard cut it short. "Call it what you want. Truth's the only judge here." Olivia watched, heart pounding in sync with the distant crow of a rooster, the scene unfolding like a slow-burn reel. The sheriff's bluff cracking under the weight of collective honor, Eleanor's grip steadying as the crew's presence filled the porch like reinforcements long awaited, tension coiled tighter, the air electric with unspoken stakes, the cruiser blocking escape, the ridge behind them, still echoing with the chaser's dust. The sheriff straightened, folder crumpling in his fist, face flushing under the rising sun. "You think a bunch of grease monkeys can scare me off? This town's mine." But doubt flickered in his eyes, the moral ground shifting beneath him like seismic fault lines. Ethan held his gaze, unblinking, the broken chain tattoo flexing with his steady breath, a symbol of chains broken, not by force, but by the unyielding pull of loyalty. "It's not about scaring. It's about keeping promises, yours to the badge, ours to each other. Walk away clean, or the truth rides out with us." Elena lowered the shotgun slightly, a tear tracing her cheek, catching the light like a diamond of vindication. The crew murmured affirmations, their voices a low chorus, weaving through the morning hush, Jenna's nod fierce, Ray's stance immovable. Olivia felt it then, the thread binding them all, her own evaporating vows mending into this tapestry, the kiss in the diner evolving into a stand worth the risk. The sheriff hesitated, radio crackling unanswered in his hand, the dawn's full light now bathing the porch in unrelenting clarity. He tossed the folder back, steps retreating toward the door, but his parting glare promised shadows lingering. "This ain't over," he muttered, voice laced with retreat's bitterness, slamming the door behind him as he radioed for backup, unseen forces stirring beyond the ridge. The group exhaled collectively, the porch creaking as they clustered around Elena, hands clasping shoulders in silent victory. But Ethan's eyes scanned the horizon, the black SUV's distant glint, a reminder that corruption's roots ran deep, twisting toward the heart of their fragile peace. Olivia touched his arm, her voice a whisper against the wind. "We held the line." He nodded, the weight of the promise lighter now, shared among the chosen. Yet as sirens wailed faintly from town, the real test loomed, exposing the rot fully before it claimed another soul. The sun crested fully, gilding the bikes in the drive, engines waiting to roar once more into the fray of redemption's dawn. The sun climbed higher, its rays slicing through the morning haze like golden blades, illuminating the ranch house in stark relief against the rolling scrubland. Sirens wailed closer now, a discordant chorus echoing off the canyon walls, growing from a distant keen to an urgent pulse that vibrated through the dew-damp grass. Eleanor's porch felt smaller under the mounting pressure, the adobe walls absorbing the sound like a weary sigh, while the faint scent of blooming creosote bushes mingled with the sharper tang of adrenaline-laced sweat. Ethan stood at the forefront, his leather jacket creaking as he shifted, eyes fixed on the dust cloud rising from the access road, a convoy of county vehicles barreling toward them, lights flashing in erratic blues and reds that painted the landscape in feverish streaks. Jenna gripped her braid, twisting it like a talisman, her prosthetic leg planted firm on the uneven ground. "Backup's here," she muttered, voice low and edged with the grit of too many close calls. Ray flanked her, his broad shoulders squared, the cigarette from earlier long discarded, its ember lost to the wind. Olivia pressed closer to Ethan's side, her hand brushing his arm, a tentative anchor in the storm, her earlier fear transmuted into a quiet fire that mirrored the dawn's warmth. The crew formed a loose semicircle, not aggressive but unyielding, their bikes lined up like iron steeds ready for the charge, chrome catching the light in defiant sparks. Elena clutched the folder of affidavits to her chest, its pages rustling softly, a shield of paper truths against the tide of badges and bluster. The lead cruiser skidded to a halt in the drive, gravel spraying like shrapnel, followed by two more vehicles disgorging deputies in starched uniforms, hands hovering near holsters. The sheriff emerged from Elena's house through the back, his face a thundercloud of thwarted authority, buttoning his shirt with jerky motions that betrayed the unraveling beneath. He barked orders, voice amplified by the morning's clarity. "Stand down! This is a clear trespass. Armed vigilantes on private property." But his eyes darted to the folder in Elena's hands, the weight of exposure settling like dust on his polished boots. The deputies fanned out, forming a perimeter that mirrored the crew's, tension coiling the air thick as a gathering squall, the distant call of a hawk underscoring the standoff's fragility. Ethan raised his hands slowly, palms open, a gesture of peace forged in the fires of restraint, not surrender. "No one's armed for trouble here," he called out, his gravel drawl cutting through the sirens' whine as they crested and died. "Just folks keeping promises. You've got the papers. Read 'em, names, dates, the whole rotten trail from your office to the banks." He nodded to Elena, who stepped forward, her slight frame belying the steel in her spine, and extended the folder to the nearest deputy, a young man with wide eyes and a badge that still shone new. The kid hesitated, glancing at the sheriff, whose jowls tightened in a snarl. "Don't touch that garbage," the lawman snapped, but doubt rippled through his ranks like wind through dry grass, whispers exchanged under the rising sun's scrutiny. Olivia's breath caught, the scene unfolding before her like a dream, etched in light and shadow. the deputy's boots scuffing the earth, the faint creak of leather as hands eased away from guns, the moral tide turning not on force, but on the unassailable weight of shared scars. She'd ridden into this fray on the back of a stranger's bike, her world expanding from the diner's greasy confines to this horizon of chosen kin. The kiss in the neon glow felt like lifetimes ago, yet it pulsed now as the spark that had ignited her resolve. The promise that she mattered, that evaporating vows could be reclaimed. "Tell them," she urged Elena softly, her voice a thread weaving into the chorus. "For Marcus, for all of us." Elena straightened, her voice steady as the ancient mesas beyond. "My husband died keeping promises like these, pulling brothers from the fire, swearing we'd stand together. You took from us after the garage he built with his hands, the land where he's buried. But these people—" She gestured to the crew, tears glinting like morning dew on her cheeks. They rode through the night to prove it wasn't forgotten. The iron promise, it's not just words. It's this. The folder passed hands, pages flipping in the hush that followed, murmurs rising as details emerged. Falsified liens, diverted funds, a trail leading straight to the sheriff's backroom dealings. The young deputy's face paled, and he stepped back, radio crackling to life with a call to the state attorney. Higher eyes, untainted by local rot. The sheriff's bluster cracked then. His retreat a slow backpedal toward his cruiser, face ashen under the relentless sun. This is interference," he stammered. But the words fell flat, swallowed by the crew's silent vigil. Deputies lowered their guards, one even nodding to Ray in quiet solidarity, a vet's recognition crossing lines. No shots rang out, no fists flew. Justice unfolded in the poetry of exposure. The corruption laid bare, like bones picked clean by truth's patient wind. As state reinforcements arrived, unmarked sedans cresting the ridge, sirens a mere formality, the sheriff was cuffed without fanfare, his badge stripped like a fallen banner, the web of his greed unraveling in real time under flashing cameras from a local reporter Jenna had tipped off during the ride. The ranch house exhaled as the dust settled, the cruisers pulling away in a convoy of reckoning, leaving the air clearer, scented now with the sweet release of wildflowers stirred by a gentle breeze. Eleanor embraced Ethan first, her hug fierce and fleeting, whispering thanks that carried the echo of Marcus's voice. "You kept it lit," she said, pulling back with a smile that bridged grief and grace. The crew clustered, hands clasping in a circle of leather and resolve, Jenna's laugh breaking the solemnity, Ray's nod a seal of closure. Olivia stood among them, no longer the outsider, her place earned in the miles and moments of quiet courage. The kiss had been the beginning, this, the fulfillment. A promise extended, a family forged anew. Ethan mounted his bike last, the engine's rumble a satisfied purr under the midday sun, its warmth baking the earth into a canvas of renewal. Olivia swung up behind him, arms secure around his waist, the road ahead shimmering like liquid silver. "Where to now?" she asked, her breath warm against his neck, the wind already tugging at her curls. He glanced back, eyes holding hers with the same tenderness from the diner, deepened by dawn's trials, wherever the promise calls. But together. The convoy roared to life, tires gripping the highway as they rode out, the ranch shrinking in the rear view. A chapter closed, but the journey endless, bound by loyalty's unbreaking chain. The saguaros blurred into guardians of the horizon, the desert's vastness a testament to actions silent yet seismic, where one stand rippled into redemption for the overlooked. In the heart of it all, promises endured, not as burdens, but as wings, carrying the chosen forward into the light of honored tomorrows. If this journey of quiet heroism and unbreakable bonds has touched your soul, thank you for riding along. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We'll keep sharing these tales of moral fire and chosen family, one dawn at a time.